Hey guys, I hope you're having a great day. So we are going to be reading the part on brain development and stress today, and we're going to get right into it because this is going to be a little bit of a longer video. The quality of the relationship to their parents seems to be an important aspect in forming the ways in which synapses are formed in children. This is especially true when it comes to the setting up of a child's regulation of their responses to stress. We know that children who are abused carry an inordinate amount of stress hormones, cortisol and or catecholamines in their systems. They also have elevated amounts of adrenaline acting on the central nervous system and remain in a constant state of alert to danger. Siegel reminds us that excessive stress hormone or catecholamines release appears respectfully to impair the hippocampal and amygdala contributions to memory processing. Under some conditions, explicit memory may be blocked from encoding at the actual time of experience. AKA, you may have blanks in your memory, right? Trauma may be proposed to be such a situation. Unresolved traumatic experiences from the perspective may involve an impairment of the cortical consolidation process, which leaves the memories of these events out of the permanent memory. And that was in 1999. That was quoted. Of course, for infants relinquished at birth, these memories would remain solely in implicit memory because of that early time at which the separation took place. It is important to point out that although explicit memory changes over time, implicit memory does not. This is one reason it is so difficult to overcome the imprints of implicit memory. The earlier the trauma, the more damaging the effect on the brain. In her Time magazine article, Madeline Nash quotes Dr. Bruce Perry of Baylor College of Medicine, who says, because the brain develops in sequence with more primitive structures, stabilizing their connections first. Early abuse is particularly damaging. And that was in 1997. He goes on to say, experience is the chief architect of the brain. This certainly makes a great deal of sense and can inform us in the ways in which neglected or abused children relate to the world. It is also a great deal about how the wiring of the brain of infants in incubators may be affected by the experience. And what of adoptees? Okay, so pausing there for a second. So we know that NICU babies, right, are affected by being in the incubators, right? So when they're away from the mother, typically, right, they are experiencing this trauma. And it can be long-lasting. However, in that moment, right, so they're in the incubator, but then they're taken out and they're able to bond with the mother. Their levels go down. Unfortunately, because of adoptees, we're majority of us, not all, are adopted at birth, we don't get that relief in our cortisol levels, right? So it's more, I don't want to do trauma Olympics here, but the damage is more permanent because we don't get that relief, is what I'm trying to say. So, when they were talking about living in a world of wanting to feel safe, you're constantly looking for danger. It's very true. Whether you're oh my God, I cannot speak today. When you're neglected or abused, don't mean to laugh, sorry. My laughing is to me not being able to pronounce words today. When you're neglected or abused or an adoptee, and or any one of those, right? Could be all of them. that is the level that you're in, right? Even if you have the greatest adoptive parents ever, right, that are trauma informed, that are very much with you, that understand, have an open adoption, you're still living in that constant what if, the right around the corner, right? So we've seen trauma victims respond like if the abuse is verbal, right? Say yelling, for example. We see that the person responds by maybe making themselves smaller, not wanting to be heard, right? So that's just an example. It's always like being on edge. And this does impact us long term through chronic illnesses and or neurodivergency. Now, I'm not saying that there's necessarily, I don't know if there's actual studies on it, but this is just my observation, that a lot of us have either or both. Okay? Our body holds on to that trauma, right? Anyway, continuing on. If, as Dr. Perry claims, experience is the chief architect of the brain, what does this mean for children whose first postnatal experience is the disappearance of their mother? Trauma, which occurs during the period of normal childhood amnesia, which includes immediate postnatal separation from the mother, will be processed as implicit memory, affecting behavior and emotional responses. Although remaining in an unresolved, unconsolidated form, the danger here is that, as Siegel says, these implicit recollections are not usually subject to a process of self-reflection, as in, why am I doing this or feeling this way? Individuals may sense these experiences as just defining who they are. This is extremely important for adoptees to hear because, as I will be explaining later, many adoptees define themselves as the way they respond behaviorally and emotionally to the experience of their trauma, rather than who they are intrinsically or genetically. It is clear that a certain early experiences create a fundamental impairment of self-organization, according to Siegel. An impairment in self-organization is often experienced by adoptees as chaos and confusion, something intruded upon their natural order of things to interrupt the natural flow of their lives. After a while, chaos may become the way in which they know they are alive. If the trauma occurs later in life, then talking about it and allowing the child to integrate is extremely important. One often hears stories in which a family member dies and no one talks about it. This aura of silence occurs for both birth mothers and children who are adopted at an age when explicit memory has kicked in. Let's pretend seems to be the order of the day. The birth mother is to pretend that nothing has happened, that she can just get on with her life. And the child is to pretend that they never had a life before adoption. In neither case is the event integrated as permanent memory, but lingers as the limbo of unresolved, unconsolidated form, negatively influencing future relationships. Furthermore, according to Daniel Goleman, author of Emotional Intelligence, victims of a devastating trauma may never be the same biologically. This may be especially true if the traumatized person feels completely helpless. He says all uncontrollable stress can have the same biological impact. The operative word is uncontrollable. It is the feeling that your life is in danger and there's nothing you can do to escape it. That's the moment that the brain change begins. And that's according to him in 1995. For the children who were relinquished at birth, a sense of helplessness and anxiety often pervades the completion of even the simplest task. For birth mothers, there's often a lack of faith in their own decision-making ability. We can only surmise and hope that those birth mothers who have some say in the choice of the adoptive parents of their children will have a feeling of more control, and thus less stress and biological change in their neurological systems. One of the things I have noticed as I work with many adult adoptees is that after a couple of visits, I can usually tell if they had some postnatal time with their birth mothers. There seems to be more of a sense of security among the adoptees and a less anxious attitude. I'm not talking about children who were taken away from abusive parents, but adoptees whose birth parents held or even breastfed in the hospital right after birth. Having read several articles about the ways in which the brain develops right after birth, I'm beginning to understand just how important this postnatal contact is. All right, pausing there for a second. I have heard a lot of stories of birth mothers not even getting a chance to hold their child, that immediately the adoptive parents like swoop in and don't even give a chance, or that the birth mother, when we were reading The Girls Who Went Away, don't even get a chance to like see the child, right? And that's harmful for both the child and the mother. Now, my situation, right, from my understanding from both my birth mother and my adoptive parents, is that she got all the time in the world while she was in the hospital and I was in the hospital. And that, they kept contact, that there were phone calls, there was emails, there was letter writing, there were pictures, etc. That was just kind of the way that my open adoption was. Now, not every open adoption is going to be exactly the same, right? There's no perfect way to do it because, in my opinion, no matter what, the child will still have questions, right? And it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. So, anyway, we're going to continue. Although any human contact is better than no contact or abusive contact, as demonstrated by the positive effect of having people touch and massage infants in incubators, could it be that the ultimate experience for infants is the loving touch of their own biological mothers? Is this what will ensure the best neurological development? As reported in the last chapter on trauma, adoptees appear to react to the experience of the separation from mother the same way that children respond to other traumas such as physical or sexual abuse. The conclusion drawn from this may be that separating an infant from their mother is a form, although not intentional, of abuse. It is at the very least, it is trauma. This does not mean that this separation is not at times necessary. There are, after all, many forms of abuse, and children who are subjected to constant abusive behavior in their biological homes may not thrive as well as children who have been traumatized by the initial separation, but are then placed with calm, nurturing, and understanding adoptive or foster parents. Separating children for reasons other than neglect or abuse, however, may be abusive to both parents and children. I agree with that statement. During the middle of the 20th century, the main reason for separating mothers and babies for placement and adoption was the moral climate of society, not because of abuse or neglect. So this still holds true. The majority have a lack of financial and or emotional support. I believe it's between 95 and 97%. And then the rest is because of some sort of abuse, whether the birth mom is going through the abuse. It could be DV, it could be, drugs or alcohol, whatever it may be. And it very well could be temporary, right? Majority are. I believe this, I don't have a study in front of me, like I said, but I believe the statistics are that less than 0.45% of birth mothers willingly give up their children, even if they had everything that they were able to have, right? That's less than, it's less than 0.5%. Like, that's what people don't understand, is that mothers want to mother, right? And while there are definitely abusive parents, we also know for a fact, and again, you can look this up on I believe it's NIH.gov, Academy of Pediatrics, childwelfare.gov, that adoptive parents, or I should say non-biological parents, right, are 8 times more likely to abuse and unalive the child. 8 times. And it's, and yet adoption is still seen as beautiful and, the saviorism and, oh my goodness, we're doing so much good, but yet we're the butt of jokes. It's really just gross. Anywho, let's continue up. All right, let's see. Is it possible that someday we may acknowledge that by separating babies and their mothers, we have set 2 people up for a traumatic experience? Much of what is... Okay, so... pausing there again. We know that this is true when it comes to, like, parent alienation, right? In terms of, like, the mom took the child or the dad took the child and, like, ran away and things like that. But yet we still don't acknowledge it for adoption. Like, we know that it's traumatic for the child if, like, they lose a parent or parents due to death. But yet we still cannot acknowledge because of adoption. That's what frustrates the heck out of me. It's like, oh, here's the exception to the rule. And yet it's not. Much of what is now being proven by technology has been initiated by some of us much earlier. Until now, however, our intuition and anecdotal observations have largely been ignored. However, new brain studies may change this. Lewis et al. Note that recent studies have intuition leading comprehension by a country mile, or as Pascal observed before any of these brain studies were begun. Reason is the slow and tortuous method by which those who do not know the truth to discover it. Sociologists, psychologists, and psychiatrists have long been saying that the first 3 years of life, much of which are not consciously remembered as actual memories, are the most important years in the development of the personality. Rather than personality, I would prefer to say the development of attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. The personality may be part of the genetic code, although it can be obscured or modified by the attitudes and behaviors formed by the beliefs based on our experiences. As demonstrated in this chapter, neuroscientists are now able to provide hard, quantifiable evidence of the effects of negative experiences on the brains of human beings. As Nash warns, just last week in the U.S. alone, 77,000 newborns began the miraculous process of wiring their brains for a lifetime of learning. If parents and policymakers don't pay attention to the conditions under which the delicate process takes place, we will suffer the consequences. And that was quoted in 1997. Along these lines, Lewis, Amini, and Lannon pose a couple of questions. Does it make a difference with whom a young child passes their time, so long as their attention is occupied and keeps them out of harm's way? Does it matter whether their caretaker is a parent, a grandmother, a nanny, a stranger, or an electronic device? These questions revolve around an inconvenient center of gravity: the specificity of a child's limbic needs. Decades of attachment research endorse the conclusion that children form elaborate, individualized relationships with special, irreplaceable others. So the answer is yes, it matters. And we forget this at our peril. Okay, so that's the end of that part. I agree that it is forgotten or ignored would probably be the best, especially when it comes to policy making, whether it's federal, state, or like companies just giving, incentives, I should say, because prior to the 80s, maybe it was even 90s, companies would only give money to biological parents, right? And then that changed where bigger companies like Pepsi, like Disney, like a lot of law firms would start giving anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 for their employee to be able to adopt. Now it's since changed yet again that they've now added, surrogacy in some cases or IVF, but they still ignore the issues, right? Like there's so much more at play is what I'm trying to say. I know that's like a company to company thing, but then like we got to think about how Roe versus Wade was overturned, right? We got to think about, how these adoption agencies put money in the pockets, they use lobbyists, of politicians to keep the laws on their side, right? Or how our our economy, our society, no matter how good it's doing, is still demonizing poverty and is still doing this kind of saviorism. And I would even say there's like white supremacy talking points on, well, if you can't afford a child, don't have one sort of thing. Not understanding that anyone at any point can be in those situations, right? And it's a whole history and problematic, and yeah. Anyway, that would have to be like a whole different video. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow for a conscious attitude.